There were some specific questions on nuclear, particularly Ian's question about why this, move back towards nuclear after a time when it looked like nuclear, because it was so expensive, was going to be ditched as a primary kind of energy technology in the UK. Sam, that and any other questions that you feel you'd like to contribute on?
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne, and thanks for all the contributions. Always really helpful to get clarity of thinking. I think, yeah, just addressing the return to nuclear, that is a really interesting question because, as Ian pointed out, it wasn't Labour Party policy at the beginning of the 2000s, and suddenly there was a U-turn by Tony Blair. And some of you may be aware the academics at the University of Sussex, Andy Sterling and Phil Johnson, who've actually done a lot of work on this and written some really excellent papers, who've really dived down analysing, because they were curious at why was there this sudden U-turn by the then Labour government, and it very clearly seems linked to the crossover with nuclear weapons and the defence side, and that's what I kind of refer to in some of my opening contributions, because if you now, I mean, governments are always very secretive about this and say the civilian programme has nothing to do with the defence side, but if you look now both in the UK and in fact in the US, it's very much more clear in government documents within the nuclear skills strategy and things like this, that they need to keep a civilian base of skills within the nuclear sector for use within the defence sector, because there's such a even longer lead in time within the defence sector. And if you look now, a lot that makes sense when you've got Boris Johnson has announced the increase in nuclear warheads, the Arcos project as well, which is obviously about the nuclear powered submarines, and certainly from the US side, I know the generals there, one of the things where they get a lot of their casualties is obviously moving all that oil around the world for their bases. So they actually want to build little nuclear reactors so they don't have to keep moving all the oil around on those convoys. So it's very much embedded within the military. And of course, civilian nuclear came out of the weapons program in the 1940s, and that is absolutely where our love affair with the atom came from. So I don't think we can ever separate it on that basis. I did notice, I think Tim had put in a question about, basic life cycle analysis. I don't have the answer to your very specific question, Tim. Probably could dig around and find it, but I mean, generally speaking, yes, the life cycle of nuclear weapons is seen to, nuclear power is seen to be more than renewables, but there's lots of factors to take into account in that. It's not just the construction side, there's the whole decommissioning side as well. So you've obviously got long-term decommissioning with the nuclear power plants. So I mean, that is taken into account with other energy systems or other technology, but obviously with nuclear, you've got a very long time that you're looking after all that waste, so that needs to be taken account of. I think I'd just say, to give time for other speakers to come back in terms of the energy system and kind of what we do, I think the energy crisis has really highlighted how little people know about our particular energy system in the UK. One, that it's fully privatised and how it interacts with the prices and the market basis of it particularly. And people saying that, that just shows why we need nuclear, we would have security. Well, that doesn't guarantee anything, because we've been exporting gas during this crisis because obviously we don't own any of the energy, so the companies can do what they like with it. So it's not going to make it any cheaper. So it does come back, we need to ensure that we have public ownership of our energy, whichever technology we have. But above all, though, we need a plan. And I think, within the trade unions and within the global trade union movement, and for those who are familiar with the Trade Unions for Energy Democracy initiative, that's stuff that we've been looking at with trade unions across the world. How, what is a program for a public low carbon energy future? So that is being developed. I've got to say, it's agnostic at the moment on technology, so it's not necessarily ruling out nuclear, but what it's actually trying to do is going back to those points which Ellen made right at the beginning, that there are technical challenges, there are resource challenges, and we have to be honest and upfront about these, and we have to understand them. But if we don't have a plan, then this is why we've just got such a mishmash at the moment of actually no strategy apart from making profits for the corporations. So, and I think just the final thing I would say, in those prices, I mean, people really do need to pay attention, because the nuclear energy financing bill that's going through Parliament at the moment and will be signed off, it's being supported by the Labour Party, will put more people into energy poverty, because that is going to be a regulated asset-based model that is going to put all those costs front-loaded onto the consumer. So they are absolutely socialising all the risks. That will be in England, and it's specifically for Sizewell C. So that is going to go on energy bills. Nuclear is not going to bring down anybody's energy bill. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. That's really important, the questions that you've answered there at the end, and that final point of it is not going to reduce our energy bills. It's the most expensive form of electricity at this moment in time, and they're prepared to plough billions more into supporting the most expensive form of electricity at this moment in time. It is worth pointing out that in terms of the energy crisis, some recent polling that was done is that ordinary people, you're right about exposing the energy system, Sam, but polling recently suggests that the majority of people do identify that the big companies are making a profit, and that's the root of the increased energy prices, alongside some issues around the supply. And most people want to see the solution to the energy crisis by investing in renewable energies and insulating homes, and that's still the two highest, levels of support around those two areas. So something to build on. Simon, can I come to you to pick up those questions on hydrogen and any other questions that you want to answer? Simon, there was that specific question on should we not invest in blue hydrogen in order to support heavy transport rather than the kind of unsustainable investment in batteries, etc. And any other questions that you wanted to answer, Simon?
Yeah, thanks very much, Suzanne. Just quickly before I go to that one, I just in response to Jennifer's question, who's talking about her neighbours, and they're all asking, well, how on earth can we heat our homes? And thinking about this thing of how much would it cost to install a heat pump and so on. I mean, I think the first, we've got to make this a collective, a thing about the collective and a thing about the state, and not an individual problem. And of course, that's to turn back the whole neoliberal narrative. And I mean, not as a slogan, but I think a thought that we have to get in the center of this, all this discussion about the energy prices, which have gone crazy in recent months, and the way that corporations and governments are trying to make people pay for that, is to to put at the center of our political campaigning and so on, energy as a service, as a right, and not as a commodity. I mean, this is right there in the history of the labor movement in the 19th century in Europe. It's actually right there in these, we're seeing these huge struggles in a lot of countries in the global south, where these populations come into these huge, massive shanty towns. And, it's not the 19th century in Europe. Everybody wants a phone signal and a couple of hours light in the evening for the kids to do the homework and so on. And there are massive struggles because the corporations come in and try to sell people energy, and imagine the bloody cheek of those people. They actually want the energy without paying outrageous prices for it. And in many, in the Brazilian shanty towns, for example, organize on a really large scale to take the electricity without paying for it in a collective manner. So that's a struggle, I think, that is going to be with us in the 21st century. And energy as a service, a right, not a commodity. We've got to find a way of putting that at the center of what we do. So that's a political comment. Second really quick one on Tim asked about intermittent renewables and so on. I mean, I don't, like Sam, I don't know the specific answer to the specific technical question, but I mean, what I read about this from engineers and people who understand the systems is that in Spain and Germany and other countries where there's a much greater proportion of renewables than there is in the UK system, they're actually finding ways, you know, this is technology that develops as you use it. And as they use it, they're finding ways that there's a lot of different methods of storage. None of them are perfect. That you're quite right to highlight that as a problem. But I think, you know, that there are many potentials, that's what the engineers say, that can, you know, we can go a lot further with that. And there are all kinds of answers that engineers will, we hope, come up with. And but yeah, I suppose we should, you know, let's not, and Ellen's made this point at the beginning. I mean, we can't see renewables as a kind of magic bullet. There are problems because of the minerals, because of all these other issues. But storage, certainly, I see more engineers saying they're going to solve the problem of storage than saying they're going to solve some of these problems with hydrogen, for example. So coming on to Dave Merritt's question, thanks for that, that was in the chat about hydrogen. I think somebody already said, I mean, blue hydrogen, well, I mean, if that paper from Howarth and Jacobson is to be believed, you might as well just use the natural gas until you can find a renewables linked way of doing it, because the hydrogen, the blue hydrogen, is actually worse than the natural gas from a carbon point of view. So why bother to switch, right? If you're talking about it, that's not to say, I mean, that, as well as the two things you mentioned, which is the vehicles and the storage for the electricity system, there's all the articles are full of discussion about the so-called hard to decarbonize sectors. And I think I'm kind of less worried about the steel making, where, you know, the guys could try a bit more recycling, than I am about the ammonia and the fertilizers, which I think brings up a whole lot of complex questions, which as a urban person in the first world, I mean, I just don't know the answers to. And, you know, people are going to have to work on those problems, right? Green H2, right? Okay. I mean, the final example you used was vehicles. I just, you know, I don't know about hydrogen cars versus electric cars. I've read up a bit on that. I don't know the answer to that one. But what I do know is that everything in the immediate political sense is, you know, stop building roads, stop producing more traffic, right? And Suzanne, you can shut me up if this is going too far off the agenda. But, you know, we're right now in London, we're having this massive campaign about the Silvertown Tunnel. If you live anywhere near London, please come in on Saturday, 2 o'clock at the new City Hall. I've said it, bit of advertising. We are going to demonstrate against this wretched Silvertown Tunnel, and all the arguments we get back from City Hall. I mean, they, you know, to be honest, they don't dare very much when, you know, after the first or second meeting, to drag out this thing about electric vehicles. But I mean, there's not going to be many electric vehicles before 2030. And, you know, what we've got to do now is not talk about electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles, or what's the difference between them. And, you know, that's for the car companies, right? Because they've got to carry on making their profits for their shareholders. They're desperate to sell people electric SUVs or whatever it's going to be. For us, the priority has to be, you know, let's have public transport, let's have the alternative modes of transport, and let's get some cars off the road. And that's going to be enough politically to keep us busy for the next few years. And when we've done that, and actually, I mean, the Mayor of London has a very impressive target, as a lot of local councils do. He's talking about 27% to 40% traffic being cut out of the system by 2030. Those are nice numbers. Those are good numbers to talk about. They're the sort of numbers we should be talking about. You can't do that and build tunnels and you know, or the National Strategic Road Programme of the government. You can't do both. So that's the political battle. And then, you know, let the engineers keep on working on the different forms of, you know, we don't need many mobile metal armchairs. I'd like to see a few more of the electric scooters, and, you know, let the councils work out how to, you know, let's put the electric scooters in the road, let the cars wait, and let the people have the pavement. I mean, you know, let's do all that first. Then we come back to the hydrogen cars and the electric cars for, you know, doctors in the countryside or whoever really needs a car. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. And quite right to raise that advert for the protest that I would encourage as many people as possible to join on Saturday. Yourself or somebody else can put a link to the details of that protest in the chat. Dave's popped his hand up, and I feel it would be fair to right, okay, thanks, Sam, I've seen that. It'd be fair to bring Dave in. I'm guessing you want to respond to something that Simon said. So Dave, I'll bring you in. Can I just say also that I know Steve is on a phone dial-in, and I'll bring you in next, Steve, as well, because I know you want to say something. And then I'm going to flag up to Sally that I'm going to bring Sally in from the panel as well after those comments and questions. So Dave, feel free to maybe comment on Simon's response to you. But you're going to need to be unmuted. Dave, you're still muted, so just hold fire for a second. There you go. You're unmuted.
Right. Yeah. The problem with electric for heavy goods vehicles is that the weight of the batteries in effect are incredibly high, and it's actually very difficult to design a heavy goods vehicle for electric operation. That's why hydrogen is important. So you know, we do need to recognize that. And I think the other issue is, you know, yes, we can talk about getting more people on public transport, but it is actually going to be an absolutely massive task to do that in terms of the scale of investment and costs to get you there. And you know, we do have a practical challenge in terms of public acceptability. You know, we've been looking at what we can do. I've been looking locally at what we can do to decarbonise transport in York, working with the Civic Trust, and we've just produced a transport strategy. We reckon that potentially you will actually have 40% of cars, 35 to 40% of cars by 2030 electric, given the way that the market is taking off. So, you know, it's not something that we can ignore on that side. And, you know, sorry, I wanted to make another point and it's now escaped me. Apologies, I'll come back later if I get the chance. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dave. And I would just comment also that Jennifer's popped in the chat there, not disputing HGVs, but why have we stopped using railway with hubs? So I would just flag up that our third session in this series of meetings is going to be on transport, and a case is made in the report to actually move much freight off HGV and onto rail, onto an electrified rail system. As well as some of the other things that people are talking about there in the chat. Steve, are you there? I know you wanted to make a comment. So Steve, you're on your dial-in from Rising Tide. Steve, I can't actually see you. So there, I can see you. So it's calling user 2, Martin.
Ah, it's working now.
Yeah, good. Right, Steve, we have you.
Yeah.
Off you go.
Not unsurprisingly, anyone knows me on nuclear.
On.
Thank you so much. So I did see a question about Drax burning coal. Drax has converted 4 of its 6 units to burn biomass, but it still can burn coal. It still burns a small amount of coal, and the government has been giving Drax extra funding to burn coal because of the energy crisis. So it is still doing fossil fuel burning. I also saw a question about why wind isn't getting more funding. And this is a huge issue, that wind power has had its funding slashed. All the subsidies have been taken away. A huge number of the subsidies have been taken away. Solar power has also lost a lot of funding. And unfortunately, that funding is not, it's going to biomass burning instead of wind and solar and genuine renewables. There's a pot of money for renewable subsidies, and biomass burning is getting the vast amount of that pot of money because it's classed as renewable energy, even though it isn't at all. And another potential reason why wind isn't getting the funding it should is because Drax and other biomass companies are extremely good at lobbying. We did some research into some of the lobbying activities that Drax has been doing. They have regular meetings with government ministers. Drax also funds an all-party parliamentary group on renewable and sustainable energy called PRASEG. And one of Drax's former executives, Rebecca Heaton, was until last year a member of the Climate Change Committee. And she was attending meetings where they were discussing climate policy, including BECCS and biomass policy. So Drax is extremely good at lobbying the government to try and get more subsidies, and that's at the expense of genuine renewables. And I also saw a question about what would happen if we closed Drax, what would happen for the workers? And it's a really important question. We don't want communities to be stranded. We want support for workers, that there could be retraining. And it's so crucial that this climate change book has come out, that you've done this amazing research into the huge potential for genuinely climate-friendly green jobs and the retraining that's needed for workers to help them move into areas like wind or solar power. And also, I know a lot of work is being done at the moment in the North Sea, in the northeast of Scotland, to talk to oil and gas workers about a just transition and interviewing these workers into the kind of training that they need. And I think that's something crucial that we could do in Yorkshire and Humberside, in areas that would be most impacted if Drax closed down, so that we could find out the kind of skills that workers need. And that's why this report is so crucial, and also the work that groups like the New Economics Foundation are doing into researching the just transition. Because unfortunately, Drax is intent on expanding its burning. Last year, it took over a huge wood pellet company in Canada called Pinnacle, and Drax is now sourcing wood pellets itself. It's not just buying from other companies, it's actually producing its own wood pellets, and it's getting pellets from some of the most biodiverse forests in the world, including from the boreal forest in Canada, which is one of the world's most important carbon sinks. And Drax is now planning to sell wood pellets to Japan and to Asian markets. So it's planning a massive expansion of its burning. And we don't have enough trees in the world to meet the demand. So we really cannot carry on with this destruction of our forests if we're to have a chance of keeping global temperatures below 1.5 degrees. And there was also a question about heating homes and heat pumps. And we've been doing some research into the government proposals that they would install biomass boilers in houses as an alternative to fossil fuel heating. And unfortunately, biomass boilers have similar problems of air pollution, destroying forests, harming wildlife. So they're really not a solution, but we completely agree that insulating homes and adding heat pumps are absolutely essential to help us meet our energy needs and help us heat our homes in a sustainable way. And I think I saw a final question from Helen mentioning that we're going to have a really important event coming up in April, because that's the Drax AGM. And they're also having a huge biomass conference on the 27th of April to the 29th in London. We don't know where the AGM will be yet, but if you'd like to get involved, that would be absolutely amazing.
Sally, thanks for that, and really appreciate the answers that you gave to the questions, that many questions that I managed to miss there in the chat. And I wonder if it's possible to maybe share a link in the chat to Biofuel Watch and some of the work that Biofuel Watch are doing more broadly, as well as specifically on the question of Drax. I know there's a lot of energy coming out of the COP26 mobilisations in the Yorkshire and Humberside region for the kind of work that you talked about, like what kind of jobs, what kind of energy could be created in that region if Drax was shut down. So I'm going to finish up by going back to Ellen. Ellen, some specific questions that I'm sure you've already prepared an answer to. So around those questions, again, that are raised around intermittency, around storage, about therefore, is renewable a viable alternative to our energy systems? The questions that Jennifer raised around heat pumps and the unequal access to more sustainable sources of energy. And then there is this question about community energy that's kind of weaved its way through through the chat. Should we be putting more emphasis on community energy rather than centralized energy systems? Alan, I'm sure there's other things that you specifically as well want to include. But basically, I'm handing back to you. So you'll do the final wrap up, and then just a few announcements to finish up tonight's meeting. So Ellen, over to you.
Yeah, so I was actually going to start by commenting on the whole question of local and community-owned energy generation, because it is really it can seem to be a little bit of a tension between different approaches that when we talk about a national climate service, that very much what comes to mind is big utilities and the big picture, and but a lot of the work that's actually happening on the ground with campaigners in towns and cities is actually tied in with projects to try and get whether it's sort of cooperatives or community groups that are trying to get some local generation or local movement on retrofitting homes and things, or whether it's pressuring their local authorities to do what they can with the pittance that they're allowed in the form of grants and funding from central government. I've just seen Ian's just put in the chat that public ownership doesn't preclude co-ops or community ownership, and I absolutely agree with that. I think there is certainly room for cooperatives and community initiatives, but I think that what's important is, well, two things that certainly as it stands, and probably just for technical reasons as much as anything else, that small scale local generation is probably only ever going to be a small percentage of the energy mix. That doesn't mean it's not important, and I think it is important for a number of reasons. I think technologically, these are the conclusions that I've come to as a novice. I'm not I'm by no means a specialist in any of this at all, but the conclusion I've come to is that for technological reasons, we do need to have more dispersed generation. We need a lot more rooftop solar. We need a lot more local storage happening. But it and one of the reasons for that is because if you think about the intermittency problem and the fact that that demand for energy, particularly in the domestic sector, can actually be sort of 3 times greater at certain points in the year than it is at other points in the year. What that actually means is that although we've said that we need to double the amount of energy that we need to double the amount of electricity that we need to generate overall. That's one of our starting points. If we were to generating all of that centrally and sending it through the transmission system, we're not talking about doubling it. We're talking about maybe quadrupling or something like that. No, we're talking if you're talking about being able to put enough power through the system to be able to meet those peaks. So for that kind of technical reason, it seems to me that we do need to have quite a lot more dispersed generation within local distribution systems. Now that does add complication into the system, but it seems to me that needs to happen. And for similar reasons, it seems to me that there needs to be quite a large amount of distributed local storage as well, whether that's in the form of batteries or whether it's in the form of other technologies.
yeah, because if the storage is all centralized, it doesn't solve the problem of the amount of voltage that's got to go through the transmission lines at peak times. So so we have to do that. But the issue is, it comes back to the question of how it's organized, who owns it, how it's managed. And again, I think that we have to find ways of bringing the local generation and the local storage and within the overall system, within an overall public energy system, which is managed by, as we've said, by the National Climate Service, because otherwise it's very, and energy needs to be a commons, like, right, everybody needs to have the right to energy, everybody needs to have the right to affordable energy. That right it shouldn't be unevenly distributed depending on people's access to resources, people's access to not just finance but other kinds of resources as well. So in an ideal world, your rooftop solar and various other things would be part of the public energy system, the way that they've been rolled out, obviously with things like feed-in tariffs and things and subsidies, which are then, I mean, the feed-in tariff then was cut with enormous damage to small companies and householders and projects that were already in the pipeline. But yeah, I think the tricky question is how to integrate all of this without undermining the principle of public ownership and a democratic and equitable way of organising things, and how we do it in a way that means that the system can be properly integrated and properly managed without resorting to this kind of business of individuals just selling energy to the grid to make a bit of a profit on it and that kind of thing. So sorry, that was a bit of a long-winded answer, but it kind of it's yeah, the question of local versus a kind of over local versus centralized is hugely tied in with the question of governance and ownership, of course. Yeah, and I think as Wolfgang's just put in the chat that local can be a very useful test bed for innovation and for how things can be rolled out. Yeah, if we do something, I mean, for instance, we've got an idea in my union, which is Unite. The idea has been floated of using Leeds as a local kind of a pilot for getting a mass retrofit program. Now, if that works, then it makes it easier for campaigners across the country to say, look, this is what should be happening all across the country. But also, it has the advantage of, like, people are far more likely to be active and engaged if they're actually involved in local projects as well. It doesn't have to be energy, it could be food growing or any reforesting or whatever. I think that we have to get people involved. We have to get people enthused and motivated to make this transition. And one of the very effective ways of doing that is to get people involved in actual projects, getting stuff done. Because lots of people hate meetings. Yeah. I think I can't read my own writing here. Yeah, sort of building these campaigns within the unions, I think, is a point that can't be stressed enough, because it's not. Yes, it's. For a lot of workers, it might not be what's strictly defined as a workplace issue, but access to energy is very much part of the wage. If we look at it that way, it's very much, how much you earn in pounds and pence is only meaningful in relation to the cost of living and in relation to the things that we need individually and collectively. So it is an issue for all workers in all sectors, and we've really got to, I think, work on raising. People are aware of it, but actually making people aware of it as a union issue. I just wanted to add a little bit on what Sam said about the life cycle analysis of the emissions from nuclear, because I think one of the things that you notice when you look at the when you look at the literature on this, which I've admittedly probably only done quite superficially, but what's clear is that the results of lifetime analysis are vary widely. They're absolutely widely. You know, there are some that show the emissions as being massively greater than for renewables, and then some that claim that it's the least. It has the lowest carbon footprint of any technology. But the latter, the ones that show it coming out favourably, then turn out to be ones that have not really taken account of the decommissioning phase. That's one of the things. And also, they've not taken account of the fact that it becomes more and more carbon intensive. The more you mine for the uranium, it becomes the quality of the ore becomes less and less, and therefore the cost of actually getting it becomes proportionately greater. I mean, talking about the carbon cost here. Blue hydrogen for industry. We need to get our heads around this, because it's not just about blue hydrogen. It's not just about energy. There is when we're talking about these industrial clusters in certainly in the northeast and around the Humber, around Teesside, is so many different industries are all bought into these so-called decarbonising projects, and it's not just things like steel. It's animal feed. It's all sorts of chemicals. It's glass. It's concrete. It's cement. We've really got to get our heads around what this is going to mean, because so much of this is going to be, and the aim of the lobbyists is to get it locked in. That's and I'm worried that we're losing time on trying to build campaigns around this. I just wanted to also make a quick comment about the research that's been done by organisations like the New Economics Foundation, and also some people at Leeds University have done some work about workers' attitudes towards transition. And just one of the things I think that it's very clear that workers understand the need for this, and they want it. They want to be retrained. They want to be transitioned where that's necessary. They want the policies that enable that. But they're not just necessarily focused on, oh, I work in gas, so now I want to work in wind power or solar. It's like there's a surprising, perhaps, amount of interest in being retrained to work in areas of the care sector, for instance, like whether it's elder care, childcare, mental health support, and things like that. And these are things that we do recognise as part of a just transformation of the economy, that we do need more people working in those areas, and that people aren't necessarily just totally wedded to the idea that, I've got to be an energy worker or I've got to be an industrial worker. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. I think I've covered as much as I could remember, and I've used up a lot of time, so thanks.
That seems to be a good place to leave it, that there is support for this transition. I mean, there certainly isn't political will behind it. Everything pushes in the opposite direction. So it does come back to a question of our capacity to mobilise as a movement on the streets, in our unions, through industrial action, to really win some of these demands. That can feel like a big ask, but there are some stepping stones to doing that. Simon mentioned earlier about the important protests against road expansion happening this weekend. There are protests coming up around the cost of living crisis, in which we can raise some really, really important demands about the energy transition that we do need. Others have mentioned some of the specific battles against money going into the wrong direction, the anti-drugs campaign, etc. And I will repeat again that the more work we do in our own unions to fight for a real the energy transition that we need, the easier it is to mobilise around these set of demands. I do want to thank our speakers. We did set aside 2 hours, which we kind of needed to even begin to touch the surface of this. It was great to see so many people turn out for the call, but I do want to thank Sam and Sally and Simon and Ellen for their contributions tonight. I want to encourage people to buy, read, sell the report and popularise some of the information there as widely as possible. We had a first print run, which we're kind of running out of. We've only got not a handful. We've got a small number, a couple of hundred copies of that first print run available, which is really great that we've managed to sell as many as that so quickly. But that shouldn't stop you from putting an order in. It should encourage you to put an order in. In the chat, Chris Price put earlier a link to our next meeting, which is next week. So it will be February the 28th, again, a 6:30 start. And that second meeting will focus on the chapter on buildings, retrofitting our buildings. And Ellen and Wolfgang will be back to talk in more detail alongside Linda Clark, who's a professor with a particular focus on the training needed to make this transition and deliver the change, the retrofitting to our homes that we need, and another speaker that I'm sure I've forgotten, but it's a good lineup. So on that note, thanks everybody for joining tonight. I think that's probably sufficient to finish tonight.